Hi, I'm Andrew Rodriguez, and welcome to Psycho Bible, babbling about psychology and theology. I want to make another video that is an addendum or a follow-up to my video on sexual arousal templates, which was also a response or a follow-up to my earlier video on dismantling the sexual orientation paradigm. And so I want to supplement that video on how I was saying that the alternative to sexual orientation is simply acknowledging what type of sexual arousal templates that you have, which may or may not go along with your actual design, or God's intent for you, or your convictions, your values. They're independent of all of that. And so you may have an impetus, though, to seek to align your sexual arousal templates with your convictions, with your design, with your intentions for life, or work on decreasing certain sexual arousal templates, uh, sort of taking the power away from them, and maybe cultivating new ones. So that's certainly the major alternative to a sexual orientation, because the whole idea of a sexual orientation is to whom or to what type of relationship or uh, gender expression do you find yourself most attracted to and aroused by, in other words. But I want to bring up another alternative or um, another aspect of what we're left with when we remove sexual orientation as the paradigm that we're operating in. And that is the core of our attachment longings. If you're on social media long enough, you'll encounter people who claim to have a particular sexual orientation who may not even experience strong arousal feelings. They may go by asexual or eroase or uh, maybe demisexual, where their sexual arousal is more contingent on the relationship that they're in and feeling like well connected and attached and attuned to someone else. So there may be these people who they just identify their orientation based on those patterns. But there are those who arrive at some other so-called orientation because of some other feelings they have, but they may not actually be sexual feelings or even very much romantic feelings. So how are they arriving at their orientation conclusion? It's because they have more of an emotional longing for a type of connection or relationship. This actually brings up a distinction that we sometimes hear of, uh, homosexual versus homophile. Those who seek a sexual connection with someone of the same sex versus those who seek uh, a type of loving relationship or bond or even just simply a friendship with people of the same sex. So we see there's an identification going on based on emotional longings. And I think this is one of the reasons why we've seen an explosion or an expansion of the definition of sexual orientation to be emotional attraction to someone. The problem is that that's so broad, as we got into in the video on dismantling the sexual orientation paradigm, an emotional attraction can be quite broad. For example, if we talk about same-sex attraction, now typically I'm using that term to mean same-sex sexual attraction, same-sex erotic or eroticized attraction, or same-sex arousal. But like I mentioned in other videos, I have plenty of colleagues who really want to be very clear and say, no, no, not all same-sex attraction is sexualized. For example, all men, and women as well, have a core need for attachment with members of their own sex. And so there then may be a type of attraction to members of their own sex that are non-sexual, they're non-erotic. But if we're then going to say that sexual orientation can simply be emotional, then those non-erotic, non-sexual attractions toward people of your own sex becomes a basis for a sexual orientation. So hence one of my problems with the whole sexual orientation paradigm. But once we remove that paradigm, then it frees these types of individuals who don't really have a strong sexual urge or sexual fantasies or strong arousal response to think a little more clearly about, well, what is it that they're really experiencing? And so they can identify that, well, I'm experiencing certain desires or feelings, longings, core longings. We also see this in individuals as they go through the healing process and they achieve progress in gaining insight into and deconstructing their sexual arousal templates. For example, I see this often with guys who have same-sex sexual arousal templates. As they learn how to self-regulate and then look into the attraction, gain insight into what is the underlying desire beneath it, it ends up deconstructing the arousal. And they don't find things that normally would activate their attractions and their arousal and normally activate them to want to do something, to have some sort of behavior or urge. It's not as powerful anymore. So the sexual stimulus is no longer so appealing. But what they find is that, wow, I still have this sort of ache, sort of restlessness or discontent, because the underlying desire may still be unfulfilled. It's just been de-eroticized. So they're able to see the attraction for what it was. It was an eroticization of an emotional need, an emotional longing. So what are those underlying desires, those longings that then become eroticized? Well, as I mentioned in the previous videos, ultimately sexuality or sexual attraction is the extrapolation of attachment. And so these underlying longings, these desires, these emotional needs are attachment-based desires and needs. So we would say that they're longings such as the longing for attention, affection, attunement, acceptance, approval, affiliation, and admiration. And I list these in that order on purpose. I'm not just like spouting them off the top of my head. I ordered them in that way because I think that this is the order in which they are most developmentally relevant. So, attention. A baby has needs to be attended to by the caregiver, by mom, by dad as well. But babies totally unable to meet their needs on their own. So babies cry and they just need someone to be attentive. There's this old school approach to parenting that was, oh, don't go and respond to the baby every time they cry. You'll spoil them that way. And so they need to learn how to cope on their own. But a baby, like a newborn baby, really has no way of self-soothing. They're utterly dependent creatures. So real wisdom is that no, when they're a baby, you need to be attentive. So the baby then internalizes your soothing, your way of soothing them, becomes their way of self-soothing as they grow up. Now, if we're talking about a grown adult, you don't have to rush to them every time you see that they're having a strong feeling or emotion. Like, as an adult, you can, all right, downregulate, you can soothe yourself, and reach out if you need help. And be receptive to others' offer, but they're not going to be imposing their comfort and their help on you. But babies need attention. It's kind of these two things here, attention and attunement, that are what secure attachment in early childhood. I put affection next because babies also need, in the attention that they're getting, a type of, well, the attention they need is actually a soothing, a type of care, a comfort, as well as delight. Babies want to be delighted and they want to see a smiling face. They want to receive soothing touch. That's affection that makes us feel assured, stabilized, comforted, secure. and also fun. When we get affection through play, we feel humor, we feel joy, we feel enthusiasm, delight. So that is one of the often neglected needs. And when you look in the different psychological literature, when it comes to lists of needs, I think it was only William Glasser, the founder of reality therapy, that actually would list fun as one of our core needs. And most other people, they talk about, well, we need safety, we need belonging, we need self-esteem, but fun, we need that. And that's first acquired through affection. Ah, attention from someone else doesn't just meet a need for hunger and thirst and maybe a warm blanket, uh, but also attention from others feels delightful. It feels good. Ah, and then attunement is so important for babies as well. The baby needs balance and harmony, the right amount of attention and affection, and the right amount of space. You see this in attachment research where they have the baby and they instruct the mother to play with the baby, engage the baby, and you see the baby enjoying that attention and connection with mom. But then there comes a point where the baby is a little too overwhelmed. The baby gets overstimulated. And the baby starts to kind of pull away. And if the mom persists in giving that attention and affection, when the baby starts to pull away and look, avert their gaze, look around instead, the baby gets overwhelmed and will dissociate. It will just sort of check out and will start distracting itself. And so the baby needs a mom who's attuned, who knows, okay, you need some space now. I won't overwhelm you. And mom will pull away. And then if the baby wants more attention, the baby cries out and the mom returns, gives the attention again. And so the baby knows that, if I need space, I can get space. And if I need attention, I can request it. And I can trust that someone will be available and be willing and able to meet my needs. But if the mom is inattentive when the baby cries out and only occasionally responds, baby learns people can't be trusted. I don't know what baby becomes deficient in their ability to understand what they can do to get the attention that they need. And if the caretaker is overly attentive, the baby learns, I can't escape from people. I can't have my own autonomy. I can never just be alone for a bit, and experiences others as overwhelming, as engulfing and devouring. So attunement is so important for babies to get that the right amount of attention, the right amount of time, the right amount of space. And then there's acceptance. Now as we move further down into developmental milestones here, this is where the toddler needs acceptance as both someone who's autonomous, their own individual. This is where now the child is entering into the terrible twos. He's mobile now. He can move around. He can explore the world. He needs a secure attachment with mom because she remains his secure base as he goes out and explores the world. And then he just needs to touch mom again periodically and be like, hey, mom, did you see that? Did you see what I did? See me go down the slide, mom? You see what I did there? Or, not just age 2, but, 2, 3, 4 years old. And knows that if he wanders too far or does something that gets him hurt or in trouble, can see where mom's at, can run back to her and get the comfort and attention that he needs. And so he needs to know that he's accepted as an individual, that mom's not going to punish him for being independent, but he's also still belonging to her and to the rest of the family. So that's acceptance. The importance of acceptance is knowing that I belong even as I am different. Even as I individuate and I differentiate in some way, I still belong. Some kids don't get that. Some kids are always taught, you only belong if you adhere to these rules and if you are under my watchful eye and if you do everything I say and the way I say it. Like that's the message they get, that I only belong if I meet this criteria, if I, these are the conditions. So if we're using, like, say, Eric Erickson's stages of development to be the autonomy versus shame, And then that brings us to the next stage of approval. So one of the core attachment needs we have is approval. The toddler needs to know that he has efficacy and he can meet goals. He can actually affect change in his world, and it meets certain standards that, see, did I do a good job on this? As well as he needs to know that he is morally approved of, that he's still a good boy or she is a good girl, that she's still loved, even if she's not perfect, but that she still has innate and intrinsic value. So approval is so important to know that I can achieve things and others will affirm that. So affirmation would also be another one. I might not have listed that earlier, but I would say affirmation and approval, pretty much the same things. Affirmation is simply agreeing with how well you are assessing yourself. So approval and affirmation go hand in hand. As we move further into the play age and the school age, like preschool and then elementary school years, affiliation is super important. That child needs to know that he or she is part of his or her same-sex peer group, that they belong. That the boy needs to know that he's one of the boys, that he has everything he needs to be one of the guys, and a girl needs to know she's one of the girls and she belongs in that world. So it's more than just being accepted by mom and dad, and that, hey, you belong in this family, but also that I'm part of this larger world out there of my same-sex peer group. And so affiliation is important. And this is what prepares a child for puberty, when now it's the sex to which you feel different from, that you see yourself as unique from, that is what you become attracted to. It becomes eroticized. And then the final one on the list is admiration. I'd say it's important as well in the play age. The play age child needs to know that their own peers, as well as younger kids, look up to him or her. Like, there's a hierarchy system. We're around preschool and elementary school kids. There's a big deal about, are you one of the big kids or are you one of the little kids? And you don't want to be associated with the little kids when there's some big kids around. You want to know that the little kids look up to you and the big kids accept you as one of them. But it's an even bigger deal, especially among boys. And girls, I imagine, as well, in their own ways. But it's a big deal when you can impress your peers. When you can do a really cool stunt on your bike and your kid's like, wow, that's awesome. Or you're playing a video game and you're winning. And the other kid's like, wow, you're really good. Or, you can tell if they're trying to compete. You're the one that they try to beat. When you're playing sports, and you can tell you're the one who's picked first. You're the one they're trying to have on their team. Or you're the one they're always trying to guard when you're playing basketball or football, and like you're the one that everyone's trying to compete against. You can tell they might not use words like, wow, you're so awesome, but you can tell there's an admiration there. The play age and school age child longs for that, longs to be admired by their peers and by younger kids as well. And really admired by mom and dad. Boy loves it when he does a cool trick on his bike and it's like, Mom, did you see that? Or he dives into the swimming pool. Mom, did you see? That's because she's his primary attachment figure. He wants to know she's impressed by his development. And then the child in adolescent, or the adolescent who's now going through puberty or has surpassed puberty, longs for the other to find him to be valuable, or her. The desire for admiration is now for the other sex to see you as desirable, as attractive, as important, as one worthy of pursuit. So these are attachment needs. When fulfillment of these desires are disrupted, a core wound or deficit is left. And like I've said before, the greater the deficit, the greater the desire. And when we use certain creature comfort behaviors or impulsive or compulsive behaviors repeatedly to try to comfort ourselves in this deficit, or there are pseudo attempts to fulfill this deficit, this leads to another A word, addiction. So this is another problem with the so-called sexual orientation paradigm. Some guys don't know which one they are or what they are. Now, this is very rare. I want to be very clear. This is very rare, but I do know some guys who don't have much sexual arousal, but they do have strong longings. And some of these guys are ones who may be involved in the ex-gay ministry space in some way, and so but they don't even know how to identify because, like, well, I never identified as gay. Um, but I knew that there's something that was lacking. I always had a longing for connection with other guys. They haven't, their longings for connection with the other guys just hadn't been eroticized for some reason. And it's probably because of some sort of protective factor in their life, such as their innocence was preserved in some way. They might have been protected against exposure to erotic material or pornographic material, and protected against exposure to sexualized behavior such as masturbation or yeah, other forms of self-stimulation or experimentation with peers or other children younger or older than them. So it just did not occur to them to fulfill their longings through sex or masturbation. They just were a little more innocent, but yet they were still left with this longing for connection that was left unfulfilled. And they could have also had a very strong conviction against using lust and fantasy, even in their private life. So these could be some protective factors that might have protected them from eroticizing those unmet needs. But I would still say these individuals are still highly vulnerable. They might not have gotten to a point where they start to develop sexual arousal templates for someone of the same sex, or any sex for that matter, or they might not have even gotten to a point where they started to engage in relationships or behaviors with anyone. But they're still vulnerable to certain temptations or vulnerable to being confused about their so-called sexual orientation. Given their lack of romantic or sexual desire for anyone of the opposite sex, but then having a strong longing for non-sexual attachment with someone of the same sex, they may be led to believe that this reveals their sexual orientation. And I believe this is what certain side B gay Christian types are referencing when they say that their gay sexual orientation colors everything they do and how they relate to others, the quality of their friendships and their conversations and their interests and their type of poetry they like, etc. That this colors so much things. I think it's not so much that it becomes sexualized, but there's a longing for connection with the same sex, and they have interpreted that as being their sexual orientation. Okay, so if you're someone who is perplexed or you're wondering how should I identify myself sexually, I don't really have strong sexual arousal feelings, or I don't engage in porn, or I don't, maybe if I date, but I don't really have a strong sexual attraction either way, and you're not sure what this means about you. So just some basic encouragement. I would say, one, remember, discard the sexual orientation paradigm. Don't worry about figuring out which category you belong into based on your attractions or lack of attractions or lack of arousal. Instead, I would encourage you to, one, identify your longings and then any sort of core wounds that may be at the root of those longings. So, are you longing for perhaps same-sex attention and affection? Okay. If you're finding yourself not really attracted to women, but you have a constant desire for community with them, for attention from them in a more friendship way, okay, maybe there's a longing for opposite sex attention and affection and attunement that you are lacking in some way. But you're maybe you're scared to really explore that because you don't want to come off as if you are attracted to a girl and lead her on when you're really not. That could be one manifestation of what we're talking about. So just be curious about what is the longing beneath everything that I'm experiencing, and is there a deficit? Is there a way that this was not fulfilled? This can be tough to figure out. It's a lot easier to identify wounds that were inflicted on us, like abuse or being bullied or victimized in some way. But the type of wound that comes from a deficit is a little harder because it's often experienced more as a void. But usually the longing we have, the way in which we try to imagine it being fulfilled is usually the sign of what that wound is, what that deficit is. So one, identify your longing, and then any core wounds that may be at the root. And then seek ways of fulfilling these longings that are congruent with your convictions. Particularly if you're a Christian, that's my typical audience here. So what will be ways of meeting the need for example, same-sex attention, affection, approval, admiration that are congruent with your values and your principles as a Christian, with your Christian morality and ethics. Doesn't always have to be something erotic. You can remind yourself, wait, behind my desire for an erotic massage is really a desire for same-sex touch, affection, and that's okay. Don't shame yourself for something that God actually tells you is good. It's good for us to be touched. Greet each other with a holy kiss. Okay? Affection is a good thing to God. But there's a context for it. There's a way to do it that is congruent with what is good and true. And then I would encourage you also seek healing of those core wounds. And that may be in a healing community, like a support group. It may be through a counseling relationship, through pastoral care. But above all, don't do it on your own. All right? These wounds were created through relationship, but God's way of doing things is usually healing through relationship as well. And so He has given us His body. Literally, Christ Himself, the incarnation, but He also, the church is His body. He's also given us His church to be His body, His hands, His feet, His arms, His face on this earth. So I encourage you to seek out ways to heal those wounds in relationship, to find ways of fulfilling those desires in healthy ways going forward, and be open to whatever may happen. Perhaps you may experience arousal for the first time and more sexual longings as you fulfill these needs. Who knows? Be open to what God has as you continue to integrate and grow. I hope this helps. Until next time, please remember that Jesus loves you freely, fully, faithfully, and fruitfully.